Breaking news flashed across the screen. There had been an incident. A man in his 40s was arrested for kidnapping and imprisoning a child. Black police cars were parked outside the house, surrounded by an open field. The victim was confined in this rundown warehouse for a staggering 12 years. People were gathered on the lawn as they rushed in to attend to this issue. The police had successfully detained the suspect on charges of kidnapping, confinement, and labor law violations. This news was reported all over television as breaking news, and it was covered by many headlines. For the sake of privacy, the arrested suspect was allowed to wear a face mask as the police led him past the crowd that gathered to take pictures. The media was, of course, desperate to get a nice scoop on the news. They wanted to know if the perpetrator knew the victim personally before committing the crime. They also asked important questions like who was the first to report the crime, while the police dutifully tried to push them away from the door. The poor victim was showing signs of hearing and speech impairment. This made the authorized suspect that the perpetrator was aware of this beforehand when planning the crime. They'd been able to cut through the lock where the poor victim had been confined, and they opened the door of a dark room to see stacks and stacks of books. When they were rescued, they found that the warehouse had been flooded with countless books. And seated on that mountain of books was a youth who was still trying to read in that dark room. Law enforcement reached out to their captain immediately, informing them that they had indeed found the poor, haggard-looking victim. Based on the severe injuries on his body, it was presumed that the poor boy was subjected to long-term abuse. The victim, who was nicknamed A, was transported to the hospital and is currently reported to be in stable condition. Reporters were, of course, not allowed inside as they worked to stabilize the poor victim. Some of the media tried to protest and say that they were hurt, so they also needed medical treatment. Shin Woo-jin was 18 years old. They had finally confirmed the victim's name. The youth was suffering from intense malnutrition and multiple external infections. The bright-eyed, beautiful youth was adorable as he stared into the bright light for the first time in a long time. The doctors could not imagine how someone could hurt a beautiful child, which was a bizarre choice of words, because it's not like an ugly child deserved that either. The poor boy had been locked up and forced into labor for 12 years. The youth had also suffered from hearing loss as he had not been exposed to sound for a long time. The doctor sighed and took notes of this bizarre situation. She wrote down a question and showed it to the boy, asking if he could say his name out loud. The boy stared at this question, taking it in, and she encouraged him to try saying his name. The boy finally opened his mouth to speak, repeating words that he'd probably heard all of his life. He declared that he was, in fact, a bastard. That was a rather dark response and not at all what the doctor had been going for. Well, the sun continued to shine brightly in the sky, and a rather suspicious-looking individual was about. Oh. It was just a farmer working in the hot sun and protecting their face from blisters with a bat and a face covering. While this one person toiled, a lazy man sat and watched. This seemed to be the youth's memory, and he remembered being tossed dry rice with vegetables every once in a while. The boy would scarf down the food with his hands, desperately eating like an animal since he was treated as such. Every time they opened the door, the person who fed him would call him a bastard, saying that he ate so disgustingly. The poor child was always cold during the winter because a draft would drift in from the closed windows, and he would shiver in the cold. Sometimes, when the boy was so desperate, he would even grab a roach. Hopefully not to snack on, but it was quite likely that he was snacking on it. Back to the present, the doctors were horrified by the poor youth's words, and they were rather shocked, speechless, unsure what to say to such a declaration. They were sure this was the effect of brainwashing, and they'd also found countless scars on the poor kid's body. This child had definitely suffered a lot of abuse all this time. Those monsters who'd done this to him should surely all be sentenced to death, in her opinion. However, all in all, this situation was at least a relief. The medical results were not as bad as they had feared, but the boy seemed jolted by her honest smile and kind touch. He was safe now, so he could sleep as much as he wanted in a warm bed. The doctor tried her best to communicate that he was safe and that she would soon be back. The other doctor asked if he should take care of the kid, but the female doctor assured him that she could take care of the boy by herself. The doctor managed to step out of the hospital room and ran into a huge crowd of desperate reporters who were still trying to get a good news scoop and were drilling the doctor on all sorts of questions. They wanted to know the patient's condition and if his family had been found. They also wanted to know the patient's name. They wanted to know if he had a disability and if he could communicate. They fired question after question rather relentlessly. It made the doctor quite irritated. So, she scolded them for trying to make someone else's tragedy into their entertainment. She then asked the police how these people even got into the building. They were causing such a nuisance, and all of their access passes should be checked. All these reporters would be reported for obstruction and trespassing. Well, that finally got rid of them. Things got a bit quiet after that, and the only sound was the drip in the hospital. The main character lay in bed, resting and recuperating. After a while, he opened one eye and stared out at the white room that held him. He stared at that big white fluorescent bulb with a lot of ideas in his head. Stretching out his hand, the boy's mind was flooded with more and more ideas. Suddenly, he heard a sound, and the boy looked up. There was another patient in the room using their phone. It was an older gentleman, and he noticed the youth staring at him. He had already heard the story, and he knew the boy was kidnapped. The poor child had a rough life, and he felt sorry for him because he knew the child's life would be tough due to his extra disabilities. The boy stared silently at the old man for a while, but he could see the name and all the information about the other patient that was placed by the man's bed. He even knew the guy's height and weight. Just by looking at the man, he could tell that he was left-handed and constantly dehydrated because of his dry skin. The man was oblivious to this as he was busy having a lot of fun just using his phone. The man had no watch marks or rings, so he clearly worked a physical job and had no spouse. Putting all of these pieces together, the youth could detect that his roommate was probably doing some plastering work on a low rooftop and fell. As he fell, the left-handed brain instinctively directed his left foot to land first, but the femur couldn't withstand the force of the impact and shattered, protruding outwards. The main character could imagine the man's scream of pain like he'd been there to witness the accident. He could even guess the most appropriate first aid in that situation. However, his thoughts were interrupted when the female doctor returned. She had brought him some food and asked if he'd gotten some rest. She knew he must be hungry, and she'd brought a fork and spoon for him to use. Meanwhile, her patient was busy analyzing her. The boy thought that the doctor was a man, and he noticed the doctor's drooping eyes and crow's feet at the edges. The boy also noticed how their cheek muscles lifted upwards and noticed the symmetrical smile. It was a genuine smile and a sign that this man did not see him as a threat. The doctor handed him the spoon and encouraged him to eat as much as he wanted. No one would scold him. The boy was shocked by it and stared at more food than he'd ever been given in captivity. The boy gulped, and the doctor explained that it was hospital food, so it might not taste great, but she still encouraged him to eat a lot. Well, the boy gripped his cutlery and got busy. He scarfed down that food like it was the Hunger Games, abandoning the food at some point and just using his hands. The doctor and the other patient were in shock at how fast he was eating. The doctor had to tell him to slow down or he'd choke. However, the boy had no intention of slowing down, and he just kept chowing down. He ate those plates clean and even started picking up the little grains of rice. The doctor was horrified, wondering just how this poor child had been able to survive all this time. She got a call, and she picked up the phone to greet the caller. Apparently, the boy's family had arrived. It seemed they'd been able to locate the boy's relatives. The doctor excitedly told the youth that his mom and dad were here. The youth calculated her eager smile. He recognized the titles of mom and dad. The people who had come should be his family. The doctor happily told him that the doctor would bring them soon. The youth watched the doctor leave in awe, speechless as she left. Time passed in the silence, and he wondered how long it would take for his parents to reach him. He started counting the seconds and then the minutes. Suddenly, a voice said that it would make sure that the main character could hear them. The boy was confused as his senses became even clearer. His eyes widened as his brain activity intensified. He kept thinking, and he listened closely, watching the movement outside the door. His eyes widened as the people came closer. He could hear them now. He could hear the very step of the person's heel on the floor. That sound traveled all the way to his hospital bed. It was like a sound arrow speeding right to him. The boy's eyes widened as his hearing suddenly got so much better, and suddenly everything sounded so much louder. The patient's stability was their top priority. They needed to make sure that he was not startled. The boy was speechless as he listened, and then they were getting ready to come in. His eyes widened, and he stared at the people who came inside. A woman and a man. Their faces brightened with smiles when they saw him, calling him Wujin. They rushed to him, calling him their son, even though the doctor had told them not to startle the poor boy. The boy stared at the two people coming in close with their arms open for large hugs. It surprised the main character to be embraced by a loving mother and a joyous father. The woman was pretty, so she looked a little like him, and he had his father's hair. They both celebrated saving their beautiful child, crying their apologies for not keeping him safe. They were grateful that he was unharmed and thanked him for coming back. Their cries and love and adoration were loud, so loud in Wujin's ear that he finally got overstimulated and pulled away from them in pain. The boy covered his ears, staring at them in fear as they asked him what was wrong. They were concerned, asking if he was okay, but the noise they were making felt overwhelming, and the boy cried out. It was loud. The sobbing, the crying, the shouts of joy and relief at seeing their son, All of this noise was much too loud for the little boy, who had just regained his sense of hearing. The sky was bright and blue over a brown apartment complex, and it was a bright new day in a new scene. A lady was just wrapping up a phone conversation with her mother. Seated in her house, she admitted that she had cleaned it all up and then ended the call. After the call, the girl sat in silence and wonder. See, her big brother was finally coming home, and he was likely the poor, overstimulated main character we'd already been introduced to. The sweet little brunette was not sure how to feel about this development. After all, her brother had been gone for many years. She had not gotten to see much of him since he needed to rest, plus the way he talked and acted sounded a bit unusual. She'd gotten a glimpse of him at the hospital when his mother had fed him an apple, and honestly, he'd seemed so weird back then. She'd only been a baby when he'd been lost, so she had no childhood memories of her brother to reflect on either. She had seen pictures of where her brother had been forced to live. It was a warehouse, and she could not imagine being stuck in a place like that for 12 years. The smart brunette easily reasoned that she would also be weird if she'd been stuck in a place like that for 12 years. Fortunately, the boy had seemed to have regained his hearing. However, psychologically, her brother was still a little weird. Suddenly, the girl heard a noise that startled her. Her parents had arrived pretty fast, and they had also brought her brother home. This was a huge moment for the small family, and the young girl came over to welcome her brother home. The mother guessed that the young girl must be starving, so she would get started on dinner. The father also smiled and called for Woojin to come inside. The rescued boy stepped into his home for the first time in 12 years and met his little sister. The odd boy was a little tall and gangly as he was still trying to put on some weight, and he looked around this spacious home in awe. The girl nervously said hello, greeting her big brother. The boy was a little mystified and silently stared at the house, so there was an awkward silence. Then the boy looked around and saw pictures of the girl around the house. His father placed a gentle hand on his back, understanding that it would be awkward for the boy to be home after so long. They pointed him in the direction of his room, asking if he still remembered living there. The boy mumbled that he did, and they asked if he wanted to look around his room while spending some time with his little sister, Bomi. The young girl was surprised, but the parents encouraged the siblings to get closer and spend some time getting to know each other. The sister wanted to help prepare dinner instead, as she was still rather nervous around her brother. However, spending time with her brother was considered part of helping, so she couldn't say no. Without further ado, both siblings were pushed into the room to spend some time together. The girl tried to protest, but it was too late. Soon, the mother got busy preparing dinner, and she set the pot on the fire to make some delicious food for her two precious children. While all of that was happening, the siblings stood awkwardly in Woojin's room. The awkwardness was even worse than the girl's imagination, but she tried her best to endure. The boy stared at something in his room and at his neatly arranged bed. He recognized a bed, but he'd never had one before, as he'd been forced to live on top of books all of his life. He also recognized the window next to the bed. All of these were things he'd mostly read about in a book. He knew the private computer and the chair as well. Everything around him was a little strange, but it was his. This was his room. The girl nervously talked to her brother, and he turned his full attention to her. It caught her a little off guard as she stared into those big, soulful eyes that almost mirrored her own. The brunette ended up crying because her brother looked so much cuter in person than he did in the hospital. Now that he was cleaned up and getting his bearings, he didn't look so weird after all. The girl nervously called her Appa, deciding to teach him how to use a phone. Right now, the phone that she gave him was turned off. However, she could show him how to hold it to turn it on. The boy listened attentively to the teachings of his sister, practicing and learning. She taught him their parents' numbers as well as her own so that he would always be able to contact them. She deleted her number, so he encouraged him to try saving it. The boy was in awe and tried speaking again. Speaking was something he hadn't done a lot in captivity, so he was still adjusting to it. His sister had no idea what he'd just said, and she sat there looking very lost and confused. Then she realized that he was telling her that he understood her instruction. Bomi appreciated that, but Woojin did not need to use such formal language when talking to his little sister. The boy struggled to show his understanding, using the words he was more used to using with the people he'd lived with. Bomi fell silent as she realized this was something that might take a while. Deciding to move on to other topics, she asked him to try turning on the phone first. So, Woojin did as directed. The youth stared in awe as the phone began to load before him, producing bright colors and an interesting figure. Then she taught him how to make a new contact and save her number. He listened attentively to everything that she said. The little sister called out her number, and he got to work writing it down so that he could save it. She watched in awe as he picked up the instructions pretty fast, laser focused on doing exactly as she told him. and she was surprised that this was his first time using a phone. His fingers moved even faster than hers did when she used a phone. Woojin was just worried about whether or not he'd done it correctly and followed her instructions. The little sister encouraged him, telling him that he'd done quite well and that he was very smart. It seemed her brother was the kind to pick things up so quickly. Now, she would teach him how to search for stuff on the internet. The boy was curious and confused, but he was ready to learn that too. So, she showed him how to do a search on the internet, showing him how he could type whatever he was curious about. Once he typed the magnifying glass, lots of interesting answers would pop up. The youth stared at the phone in awe. Just like last time, his sister let him try to search for himself. The brother was curious about many things, so as soon as he got the phone, his fingers started to move really fast as he typed what he was curious about. Apparently, the boy was curious about his family. Tapping on images, the boy saw various wonderful images of families loving and being there for each other. It was a series of soulful and beautiful pictures that he could not really relate to since he'd spent his whole life locked in a cage. He took note of the happy mothers and fathers in the picture. Then Woojin turned and recognized Bomi as his little sister. She was his family. Everyone in that house was his family. This was his homecoming, and the lady who smiled so happily and brightly at him was his family. The boy fell silent, looking up in surprise while his sister stared at him with a curious expression on her face. This scent, coming from his sister, he recognized as perfume. The origin of perfume dates back 5,000 years ago. It was first used in religious ceremonies as a medium for communication with the divine. They would burn fragrant wood back then. Today's perfumes were a blend of various aromatic compounds and solvents. They were also used to appeal to others or create a personal image. Just remembering all the knowledge was like being transported. Ask about that ancient time, and Woojin stared in awe. The brother pointed out now that he scented a really strong perfume, and this surprised his sister. The boy stood and followed this scent of perfume, and this alarmed Bomi, who asked where he was going. The brunette called out to the youth in surprise, and he seemed to pause. She had called him brother. However, Woojin could not be distracted from the really important situation, which was the sweet smell that came floating to him. This scene was indeed incredible, and the boy stared in awe at all the plates that had been set out. It wasn't perfume that had such a sweet smell after all. His deduction this time had been wrong. All of that delicious smell from the food left the youth in awe. His mother noticed him and happily invited the young boy to dinner, saying that he must be hungry. He was indeed hungry, and he sat to eat. The dad had even made the kimchi stew, and it was apparently so good that a person would not even notice if they died while eating the food. At this point, it sounded almost dangerous to eat the food, and Woojin wondered if he'd die while eating it. However, the statement was just a little joke from his father. His sister was invited to watch, and they all sat down like a family. There was food pushed on the boy's plate, and the parents encouraged him to try some of that nice food. The family stood around each other and chatted happily, feeding and welcoming home their new son as they encouraged him to try all sorts of food. The rescued boy was struggling with his table manners, so a bit of food flew here and there when he spoke while eating. However, Woojin was having the time of his life around these three happy people. This beautiful picture of this family was filled with light and bright vibes. Suddenly, little splotches of darkness started to appear. These splotches quickly rose in a trickle and then a wave of darkness that consumed this happy moment. A threat lingered outside of this beautiful scene. Back at the police station, the detained kidnapper was told that 5 years ago, his family members started dying, one every year. The wicked man was then asked if he had anything to say about that. The first to die was his wife, the second was his mother. Both corpses fell to the floor. The sister-in-law died from consuming a poisonous plant, and the two others close to him also died. The suspect was stuck in the police holding facility. Speechless and haggard, the man swore that he was not responsible. However, the authorities could not believe it. It was much too odd that mysterious deaths kept occurring around him, and they were sure that he was responsible. How did everyone die, and only he survived? Still, the suspect insisted that he was not responsible for those deaths. The police were sure that he was just refusing to cooperate, so they called on the detective. There was always the possibility that the suspect being questioned was not the killer. The detective found that hard to believe, and asked what the suspect was talking about. The suspect slammed his hand on the table, accusing the person he'd fed and given shelter to. Yes, this lousy kidnapper was blaming his victim for killing all the people around him. The man was handcuffed, crazy, and deemed delusional by the authorities. The detective cursed at him, telling the suspect to watch his tone, and an assistant came in, trying to encourage everyone to relax. The suspect insisted that no one understood the kind of monster that boy really was. The very smart boy that they had kept locked up in the book room for 12 years had not just been idle. He had sat using the very low light from the window, and he'd read each book cover to cover. He flipped through each page, reading about autopsy and learning all about human anatomy in the darkness of that room. The suspect insisted that the victim was indeed being subjected to all of this pain and suffering, and lightning had flashed in the sky over the shed on one dark day. The day that the creepy little victim focused very closely on the book that he read. It was evening at the beautiful block where Woojin's family lived at. It was a rather peaceful evening, and light could still be seen in the window of Woojin's room. The youth was sitting at his table, still trying out all of the wonders that he could get from this new and fancy device that his sister had handed him. With a smile, she'd told him that a lot of people watched a video app. This app was red in color and filled with all sorts of skills and information. It was the first time that the little genius was gaining access to any form of video learning, and he was amazed. He watched an interview with a man with wonder. The man was out to watch a play. On instinct, the boy greeted the video and tried to say hello. Apparently, the video had been trending a lot. Taking hold of the video cursor, the boy pushed it back a bit so he could echo the words that were spoken by this very interesting gentleman. Slowly but surely, Woojin began to practice how to say hello. Very carefully, he sounded out the words to himself. Learning how to speak, he practiced because he wanted to properly greet his dear family. So, the youth practiced hard. Then, he stared in awe when he saw a fancy plate of tteokbokki mukbang. It looked so delicious. There were some ladies eating that on their tube channel because they had been craving it all week. The food was very good and chewy. It was also full of a lot of flavor. This was so amazing, and she gasped at the beautiful stretchy cheese. The man's mouth began to water as he stared at them eating, thinking it was rather amazing and delicious. There was a loud knock on the door, and the youth was startled. His little sister had come over that morning, and she wanted to know what he was doing and if she could come in. Sure enough, he invited her in, and Bomi greeted him with a smile. The boy asked if she needed help with something, and the girl was surprised. The boy was used to getting called when people wanted something from him, so he asked if his sister wanted him to do some cleaning or something like that. The sister was surprised and quickly dismissed that line of thought. He did not have to do all that. She had, in fact, come to call him to ask if he wanted to go out for ice cream. The boy was surprised and echoed the word. Ice cream was super cold and delicious. She loved it, but she also suspected that he had never had it before. The sister took his hand and pulled him out to meet his parents. Of course, the parents were rather concerned when they saw their children heading out, telling them not to stray far and to only go to the ice cream place. They did not want a repeat incident of their worst nightmares. Bomi was to hold her brother's hand tightly and to stay together with him. The girl laughed and assured her parents that they would be back soon, and her brother echoed her words. They then stepped out together to get some ice cream. It was evening, the sun had already started to set, and cars were a little busy on the main road. The name on the ice cream shop glowed brightly, and the siblings headed inside. The youth stared in awe at the bright name on the ice cream shop, truly in awe of such a beautiful and bright sign. Inside was even brighter and more colorful. It was Woojin's first time to see so much produce in one place. His sister called out to him to keep up with her so that he would not get lost. She encouraged him to pick whatever he wanted to eat. The boy was amazed to see so many flavors of ice cream. The sweet girl giggled at his confusion and asked if he wanted her to help out. So, they both stared at the fridge of ice cream for a hot minute as they tried to select the perfect flavor. Then, she grabbed one, saying that it was quite tasty. As the two walked to the counter, she wondered if she should let her big brother pay for the ice Ria that they bought, since he was older and all. However, she decided that it was too early to rush his learning, and they would take it slow. So, she took the boy's ice cream and handed it to the cashier so that they could pay for it. With all of the ice cream paid for, the girl waved goodbye and told them all to have a nice and wonderful day. A bunch of school girls were eating ice cream outside and were quite surprised to see the pair. It was the worst. Those girls were eyeing the handsome brother. It was much too early for him to deal with the trials of girls just yet. His sister was cutely teaching him how to open the ice cream, unaware that there were a bunch of girls ogling the beautiful boy. They were quite excited and wanted to ask for his number. They even wondered if that was his girlfriend next to him. Mind you, Bomi could hear absolutely everything they were saying, and she felt rather smug about it too. Then, she told her brother to give his ice cream to her. She would open it for him. He much appreciated the assistance since he was struggling with the wrapper. The girl beamed and told him that he did not need to thank her, and she loved showing off in front of those other girls anyway. With the ice cream open, she handed it back to her brother, telling him to try it because it was super cold and sweet. Woojin took the ice cream in his hand and took a bite. He had been learning to eat things slowly, so he did not rush. Those dull eyes of his brightened in awe and wonder when he took just a bite of that ice cream. The boy could not believe what he had just tasted, and for a moment, he shook with awe. It was a whole new world of sweetness and treats opening right before him. He had never tasted something so splendid in his life. Bomi was worried that the treat had been too cold or that it tasted weird. If he did not like it, he did not have to force himself to eat it. However, the boy slowly said that it was tasty. This adorable little treat was so tasty. In fact, it was super tasty. The boy had never had anything like it, and he was in awe. His eyes watered with emotion, and he happily ate the ice cream with glee. The sister laughed, wondering when he had learnt that new word. Since it was so good, she advised her brother to eat slowly so that he would not choke. Then she had great fun calling him Appa in front of the girls, because they'd have no idea that they were biologically related. Her brother slowed down a bit, and she laughed with fondness to see him follow her instructions. Then, she suggested taking a picture of his first ice cream date, perhaps to further infuriate those leering girls. They took a bunch of pictures together, their cute, similar eyes being highlighted in a lot of them. So, they went on ahead, saying that they would eat while they walked. Later that evening, the sun kindly set over their sweet and gentle household. The two siblings were still walking back home with their ice cream treats in their hands. Bomi had sent the adorable ice cream picture to her friends, and they adored her brother, even begging her to switch with them so they could hang out with him. The girl was amused as she texted them back walking home with her brother. Suddenly, Wooin started to get left behind, and Bomi did not notice because she was focused on her phone. She kept going, not aware that her brother was not following her. See, Woojin had noticed something. A suspicious-looking man was standing nearby, and this man was watching his sister. This strange-looking man was focused a bit too much on Bomi. His eyes zoomed in on her legs as she walked. He even dared to stare at her behind like a lecherous pervert. That awful stalking man was like a hyena in the wild, doing as he pleased and preying on those who were not aware of him. Naturally, Woojin could not let that kind of behavior slide. The man's hat had lots of marks, and he narrowed his brows in concentration. His eyelids were tightly pulled, and his pupils were dilated. On the way home, their family did not realize that the odd man had been following them. This meant that they did not know him, and he was an unwelcome presence. The man was not from around here, so he had come with a specific purpose in mind. Besides, that odd and very suspicious-looking man was going to great lengths to not be seen. The odd man made eye contact with the boy and realized with horror that he had been spotted. The boy still took notes of the man, noting that his armpits were soaked with sweat, and there were wrinkles on his pants' knees. There were also pedal marks on his shoes. The width of the pedal marks was narrower than that of a bicycle, so the man clearly drove a motorcycle. There was no dirt on the ground around here, which meant that he had come from the other side. Putting all this together, Woojin could tell that the man's job did not require strict time control. The man was in his late 40s as well, and he ran a delivery service using an old motorcycle. The family likely did not know him. He was not a local. He chose to cross small mountains instead of using roads with CCTV, and his actions are systematic yet chaotic. The man was left-handed and he lived alone. Compiling all this information, Woojin called out to his sister Bomi, who finally paused. She asked why he was standing still and if he had seen something, looking around for any hints of what he had seen. He couldn't explain it, but he told his sister to just head inside first. Bomi was quite surprised at her brother's request, and she looked around, still searching for a possible intruder. She felt almost sure that he would still be around somewhere. The girl once again asked her brother if he had seen something, but he still insisted that he wanted her to go inside first. Well, it was much too late at night to leave him outside by himself. Besides, if she went inside alone, their mother would surely scold her. After all, they had only just gotten back their son. No one wanted to lose him again. The brother did not even try to fight it after that argument, and he basically let himself be dragged back home while he munched on his ice cream. Their mother was waiting for them to come inside, so it was time to go back inside. The house was peaceful and quiet, and the light was on in Woojin's window. Suddenly, the street light beside the window went out, and the neighborhood looked a tad darker. Another street light burned bright and brilliant in the dark of the night, attracting moths to its brilliant burning heat. In that darkness that stretched a mile over the country, a clock ticked in the silence of a room. Woojin stood at his window, contemplating that darkness as he waited for sleep to fall over his neighborhood. This was his family. He had no intentions of sharing this wonderful and happy life that he had found with intruders. It seemed there was another voice in Woojin's head, a voice that asked if he was going to run up to the strange guy and yell at him, mocking and asking if that was how he planned to protect his family. There were many ways to protect his family. Besides, the dark voice was a monster that did not belong in this world. The dark voice insisted that he had done what he had done to survive. In the dark of that room, if the boy was as naive as the dark voice had been, he would have already been dead. Woojin insisted that he could have survived on his own. The darkness should never have been born into this world. It began to rain in the dark of the night, and Woojin stared out into the dark sky. The voice continued to mock him, annoyed at being called a monster. However, if the dark voice was a monster, then what did that make Woojin? Saying that Woojin was not better in anything than him. The dark voice took the shape of a monstrous form in the window. The boy replied that he had his body and he was the master of this body. The darkness was just another self that he had created in a moment of desperation. The darkness laughed, asking the boy if he thought he was the complete opposite of the darkness that lived in him. They both shared the same body, so the darkness had the right to call that vessel his own as well. Anxiety and fear were what this monster fed on. Whenever fear and anxiety crept in, this monster would take over him like he was possessed. However, now, Woojin could control the darkness. He could summon it from his subconscious, and he could maximize his knowledge. Now, he and the darkness could work in tune, almost one and the same. The fierce beast with sharp fangs that lived within him could still be tamed. Today, he called for the darkness to come forth. There was an ugly beast hunting his family, and he would not let that slide. Woojin's bright eyes dulled when the monster took over, cracking his neck and stretching as it took over his form. There were bright lights still on in the neighborhood outside. Even now, in the pouring rain, an unwelcome figure stood near their home. The creature smiled to see that their target had been so kind as to present himself before them. The boy turned towards his door. He was apparently going to leave through the front door, but there were a lot of problems with that. He very quietly opened the door to his home and stepped out in the quiet of the dark. Somehow, it seems he succeeded, and the rains kept pouring down from above. The neighborhood was covered in the light rain, which fell over every roof. As the rain came down, the monster came down to meet his target. The boy stepped out till he reached the last floor, and he turned to the strange figure that was standing in the rain. The man stood there, silent under his dark umbrella, wearing dark clothes even in the dark. The boy did not falter in his steps as he walked right up to the man, and the man tried to turn his face away, still avoiding conflict at this point in time, despite being a shameless stalker. That was embarrassing. Well, the boy walked past him, deciding to let the man let down his guard a bit. He caught some of the rain in his hand, admiring the gift from the universe. Even hiding one's presence was a skill. The man was well prepared, and he planned this exact day. The man was shocked to see the boys peeking at him, asking what he meant. The monster was not amused at all, complaining that the stalker was making this whole thing a bit boring. The man was speechless and alarmed, then he asked the kid who he was. The man's grip tightened on his umbrella. That was rather dangerous. The monster smiled, mocking the man's question. The lights went off on that corner of the neighborhood, and the creature laughed, saying that question hurt. The creature knew this man well. The man had jjajangmyeon for lunch after all. The man delivered food, and he crossed hills on his motorcycle. The man was shocked by this in-depth analysis, and the boy stepped closer. He knew that this person crept around their villa like a stray dog, and only his sleeves had cat fur on them. Then, the creature asked if the man had killed a stray cat as practice. This person sneaking around their neighborhood was a dangerous individual. The man's eyes widened in horror, shocked at all the accurate deductions, and he asked just what the creature was. The boy ran his fingers through his hair, and he smiled, his bright red eyes now looking deadly instead of cute. He could speak very well as the monster, and the intense rain continued to fall when the boy kicked the stalker in his stomach. The man crashed to the ground, falling with a groan of pain. The street light flickered back on, and the man's face was now exposed while the boy backed the security camera. The man was shocked, staring at his attacker in horror, and he gaped when the boy opened his shirt to reveal many scars. The boy's beautiful and porcelain skin was littered with dozens of healed lacerations, and the man's eyes widened in fear. The lights dimmed once again, and the creature warned the stalker, telling him not to show up in front of him a second time. If he saw this stalker again, then all of these beautiful scars would be carved into the man's body. The man backed away in horror under the rain. If the man understood, then he should stop lurking like a maggot and scram already. Well, the man did not need to be told twice. He jumped to his feet and ran. The rain continued to pour as the boy stood there, watching the man flee. He had been in such a hurry that he had not even taken his umbrella with him. Well, the boy left the evidence there and slowly made his way back home, walking slowly in the pouring rain. There was a bright light over the boy, and he smiled, taking in the beautiful shine of light over his beautiful face. It was nice to soak in the rain and get bathed in the warmth of the light after a successful defeat of his foes. The rain sure sounded rather nice. Darkness fell over the neighborhood once again, except that it was free from one stalker. From night there came morning and the slow and steady transition from darkness to light. The brilliant blue sky stretched out in the morning, and once again it was another bright day for Woojin to spend with his family. They went out for dinner together and had a blast just eating hot pot. The second day, He went out with his mum and they had the legendary tiak, kakochi on a stick. The boy was excited to try that too. On the third day, he went out to watch a movie with his sister, though the boy was busy being enthralled by the sweetness and wonder of the delicious popcorn. On the fourth day, the boy stayed home with his sister and did a bit of studying. Now that he had been rescued, he had to prepare to integrate with the rest of society. He was a bit off curriculum, but fortunately, he had done enough reading in that dark and awful room that getting back on track was not too difficult. Woojin was busy doing some basic science multiple choice questions to get into the flow of things. He read every question carefully and picked out the answers that he felt were most accurate. The boy's pen moved quickly, much to the shock of his little sister as he picked out each of the answers with amazing speed, barely even lingering to think or ponder if he was selecting the right answer. Bomi was amazed at how fast he was answering, and she gently reminded him that he had to read all the questions before answering, and he could not just guess them all. However, he gently assured her that he had read them all. The sister laughed, wondering where he even learnt to say that, and wondered if she had made a mistake in teaching him about YouTube. It looked like he had just guessed all the answers, but she should at least teach him how to check his answers to make sure that they were right. So, she sat by him and decided that they would check them together. So carefully, they checked each of the answers that he had selected for each question, checking to see if he had picked the right or the wrong answers. To the girl's absolute surprise, all the answers that her big brother had selected were in fact correct. He was outstandingly correct. Bomi asked if he had really read each question before answering, and he admitted that he had. Then he asked her if he had done well. Now the sister was amazed and she pulled out even more questions, asking him to try that too. The boy agreed and got to work. Just as quickly as he had filled in the last questions, his hand moved fast, and he answered all of these questions too. It was amazing for the young girl. Then, she took the questions he had answered and checked the results. To her amazement and awe, her brother was an absolute genius. The boy countered that he was not a genius, and that he just wanted to be normal, which was rather adorable, but a genius was a genius. The sister was surprised at his request to be normal, and he said that it was hard to be normal, but he still wanted to be. At Bomi's age, no, when she was even younger, she had lived a sweet life with her parents. However, her brother had been kidnapped. Her sweet brother had been beaten up by strange men, and he'd been forced to do all sorts of awful chores. The boy would shiver in the cold while surrounded by a mountain of books, struggling to stay warm. Her big brother had suffered a lot in his childhood, and her sister had tears in her eyes because she knew that it would have been tough. The boy noticed that her pupils had lowered, her eyebrow muscles lifted, and her eyelids were relaxed. The corners of her mouth had also drooped, and she was about to cry. The boy stood and gently patted his little sister's head, telling her not to be sad. Then, he went back to the table to scribble out a few things. She was curious about what he was doing, so he handed her a little something that he had written. The girl's eyes widened in awe, and she stared at the words that he had put down. Bomi noticed her brother was busy writing, and she asked what he was doing. The boy was writing very quickly because his sister was sad. As soon as he was done, he handed his note to his sister, and she gasped when she saw what he had written, her eyes wide with surprise. Her brother encouraged her not to be sad after all, a lower body temperature could weaken her immune system. Sadness could affect the tongue too, leading to weight gain and cardiovascular diseases. Sorrow was also the kind of thing that interacted with cortisol hormones, increasing stress levels and disrupting sleep quality. Since sadness activated the hippocampus, the brain required more energy, making a person feel tired. Sadness could also reduce serotonin levels, which could lead to depression and OCD. Her brother had proudly given to her all of these very specific warnings, and she turned to him in awe, asking how he knew all of this. The boy admitted that he read a lot of books. The girl acknowledged this with amazement. Soon, their parents called for them to come out to eat. Suddenly, her usually calm brother rushed outside just at the thought of food. It seemed Woojin loved their parents' cooking very much. Bomi was surprised and turned back to the note that her brother had given her. Her parents called for her to eat, and she acknowledged their request. It did not take long for evening to descend on the simple household once again, and Woojin happily went back to monitoring the YouTube channels. The boy favored the food channels and loved seeing all sorts of delicious foods. He bet that they all tasted amazing. He flipped from one video to another in awe, his eyes wide in wonder as he spent a lot of time learning on his phone. There were so many different types of food to try, and they all looked so unique and tasty. His favorite YouTube host was at it again, and she happily greeted her viewers with a smile. Today they were going to try out mala soup. She had already had dinner, so she would just have a small portion of the soup. To this lady, a small portion meant 10 servings of mala soup. She really loved to put things away. First, she would start with the wide glass noodles, and she scooped up these unique noodles with her chopsticks. Woojin watched attentively as this stranger ate. The host chewed on the noodles, trying them out. She had ordered the spiciest level, and it was indeed very spicy. She thought that it tasted great, and Woojin was now curious about what it tasted like. Then it was time to try the corn noodles. She picked up the much thinner noodles, gasping when a few heated pieces fell on her hand. However, she assured her viewers that the texture was incredible. Now, they would wrap it up in a cabbage, like wrap. Woojin's eyes widened in wonder as he paid attention to each of her instructions and listened closely to her direction. This host was a rather popular YouTuber, and she had many videos of her trying out all sorts of amazing foods. She scrolled through each one with wonder. The next video had the lady eating ramen, and she was going to boil it from scratch. He watched in awe as she boiled the ramen on a hot stove, his eyes full of this lady's face because he'd watched her so much. Then, she had to prepare before eating, of course, and let her hair down. It was a huge pot of ramen, and she was ready to eat. That girl could really put away. The boy watched her in wonder, and he scrolled past that video too after watching it to completion. The host happily dug into the completed pot of ramen with chicken, and Woojin watched as she complimented the meat. He wondered if acting like this would make him be considered normal. Watching how this girl smiled and ate on screen, he wondered if he could do that too. His father had once asked what he wanted to be in the future. Though his mother had been surprised at the question, it was fine if the boy did not have an answer. As long as he stayed healthy and happy, that was all that mattered to his mother. However, the boy did have desires. He wanted to be a normal person, or at least whatever passed for a normal person, a normal office worker. That was a great choice, and his parents encouraged him to be anything that he wanted. Of course, Woojin's greatest desire was normalcy. The next day, the sun shone brightly over the little neighborhood, with a bit more focus on a huge parking lot around the area. Woojin was there, of course, striding with confidence towards the building that had the parking lot. The boy desired to be a normal person, and he walked to achieve his dreams. He wanted to perform a rather normal action. The main character had decided that reporting someone seemed to be a normal thing to do, so that is what he was going to do. The youth walked into the police office, overhearing an interrogation going on, and someone denying their guilt. A police officer insisted that all of the evidence was caught on CCTV, so he was sure that the suspect before him was the culprit. Even with this evidence, the suspect dared to deny his guilt. The man across the table was bewildered, and he insisted that it wasn't him. He did not even wear hats like that. The police officer grunted in annoyance that the suspect would not admit it till the end, even though they had a witness. The man was shocked and asked who exactly had seen him when he had not even been there. There was no way that someone had seen him. Suddenly, the youth appeared in the room and called out to greet the detective. The detective looked up, rather surprised to see a boy standing in the middle of his office. The boy then repeated his greeting, being a bit more specific and calling out Detective Kim Tae-yeon. Now the detective recognized him and stared at him in shock and awe. A lot of the police force had already heard the news of the boy who had been kidnapped and rescued, so the detective recognized Woojin right away. The boy had grown so much in speech that the detective had barely recognized him. He even asked the boy if he had been doing well. The boy looked so different from the haggard teenager that they had rescued from that abandoned shed. The poor child had been carefully escorted into the police van back then, the detective gently telling him to watch his head. After shoving the poor boy into the car, the detective then strapped the shivering boy in the car with a seat belt, telling him that it was okay. Placing a hand on his shoulder, he assured Woojin that he would take him home safely. The boy had been speechless at this rescue, but he had never forgotten the favor that the detective had done for him. He thanked the detective, saying that he had indeed been doing well. The man smiled and acknowledged his health, and was even impressed that the rescued youth spoke so well now. Then, the detective called for one of his colleagues to take the suspect that he was questioning to the holding cell. The man grabbed the suspect and hauled him away, though the poor dude kept insisting that he was not guilty and that he had not committed the crime. The police did not want to hear it, though. The detective sighed as the dude was hauled away, and Woojin was curious as to what that person was being accused of doing. The detective was surprised and confused, but the main character explained that criminals always denied their actions at first. The detective laughed and said that most of the criminals they got around here always said the same thing once they got caught. It was like they were all following the same script, and it was all rather amusing to him. Then, the detective asked how the boy had found him, and if he had missed him and come looking for him. The boy admitted that he had something to show the detective, and the man immediately got serious. He wondered what the youth had to show him and asked if the boy wanted a drink they could get a drink, and continue this conversation away from prying ears. However, the boy was good, and he pulled out his phone with the YouTube channels, telling the detective to take a look. The man was surprised to see a video about mukbang, and he asked what the problem was. The man asked who was in the video and if the youth had somehow started a YouTube channel. Of course, it was just Woojin's favorite YouTuber who was doing food content as usual, and she waved and greeted her followers as usual. The beautiful girl waved, and Woojin explained that watching her videos just reminded him of himself. First of all, her eyes would often shift to the upper right when she was making her videos, which meant that she was lying. At the same time, her fingers moved to her lips to show nervousness. Bringing her hand to her mouth, while lying was often a subconscious act of wanting to take back the lie. She even slightly bit her lips sometimes during the videos, and this typically happened when someone was anxious or nervous. Feeling nervous in front of food, that's a bit off after all. Of course, all this time, the lady could just be worried about how the food tastes, but there was something that Woojin just could not ignore. Her eyes would once again shift to the right during the course of the video. She would say that the food was delicious, but her eyes told a different story. Her words and her actions did not match at all. While she ate, she would shrink her shoulders, and people tended to hunch when they felt threatened or uncomfortable. This was the limbic system at work, triggering a natural self-defense reaction. It was a form of self-protection. Now, her eyes would move to the upper left while eating. This was not lying or imagining. This time, she was recalling a memory, but unconsciously covering her mouth, which meant that she was hiding something. Covering the mouth subconsciously often signified the intent to conceal something, whether voluntary or forced. Then, he noticed how this host would touch her necklace while boiling the water. This was either stress relief or a subconscious action to regain psychological stability. The detective was speechless at this analysis, shocked at hearing a boy he'd rescued quite recently not only speak so fluently, but also make all of these quick deductions. Woojin explained that his favorite YouTuber seemed to be asking for help. He'd watched her videos enough times to figure that out, and he noticed the small S that she put on the table. She had left other noticeable signs in the corners of the video. An S, an O, and yet another S. If one put all of that together, all of those micro-expressions and unconscious behaviors, it was too much of a coincidence to ignore. That was why he had come now to report it. In other words, Woojin strongly believed that this host was being held captive somewhere, just like he had been. He had compiled all of the evidence from each of the videos that he had watched and was now sure beyond a reasonable doubt that this lady needed help. This lady had even signed various letters in each of her videos. Letters that he had caught, letters that were very discreetly in each image that passed. However, all of this still bewildered the detective, and he did not truly believe that this girl was captive. Still, Woojin was not deterred and went on to prove it. At first, she had given subtle hints through her hair, then through her hair tie. Now, it was through the background. She was showing more courage each time she managed to post a video. The detective then asked the boy to speak in clear terms about what exactly he was saying. The victim was likely in their early 20s, and the YouTuber likely had no family or grew up in a troubled environment. The perpetrators were not just one person either, but multiple. They were likely between their teenage years and early 20s as well. The ringleader of the gang that held the poor girl captive was quite likely in his 20s. The girl also likely did not graduate from middle school. The detective was still busy being slow, saying that he did not understand. Even if it was a fat chance, it was a possibility worth investigating. The detective could not believe that a young girl was kidnapped and being forced to make YouTube channels. The boy admitted that he did not know the perpetrators. After all, he was locked up for a really long time too. He had spent days, weeks, and years slaving away in the cold without proper food or a proper bed. That was why he was working hard now to save someone else from a terrible fate. That was why he could recognize the behavior of someone who was being confined. The boy then asked the detective if he thought coincidences could reveal the truth. The detective was still heavy in his disbelief era, so he still was not buying it. So, Woojin decided to bring his deductions a little closer to home. The boy could guess that the outfit the detective wore had been bought by his mother. After all, his own mother had bought all of the clothes that he was wearing, too. The detective was surprised at this accurate deduction, so the boy explained that this was just the first coincidence. Just now, the suspect may not be a professional, but he was likely passionate about playing the violin or the viola as a hobby. Woojin could tell this, and the detective was surprised to hear that the culprit could possibly play an instrument as a hobby. If the boy was right, then that would be the second coincidence, and he could keep going. The detective laughed and asked the youth if he wanted to be a profiler or something like that, but the youth shook his head. In truth, Woojin just wanted to be an ordinary officer working, and right now, he was just here to report something that he had noticed. That is why the youth was now explaining things to persuade the detective. To confirm the legitimacy of Woojin's detection skills, he asked the detective to ask the suspect in the holding cell about their hobby. After asking if he was wrong, then they could charge him with obstruction of justice, and he would take full responsibility. The detective groaned and laughed at the thought of accusing the youth of obstruction of justice. After all, Woojin was just sharing his theory, that was all. The detective did not see that as such a big deal. They went way back, so he could at least just ask about the suspect's hobby. The detective told the youth to wait a moment, and he would just go over and ask. So, the man stepped forward and went to ask. The detective strolled over to the holding cell, and he could not help but smirk in amusement at his actions. He was over here letting a recent rescue play detective because of a set of odd coincidences. Still, the kid sure spoke much better now, and he claimed to know how confined people act. The detective then paused as he recalled the odd deduction on who had bought his shirt, wondering how the boy had even guessed that. Well, the detective would not linger on that, and he got to the holding cell, calling the attention of the suspect. Just for the sake of it, he asked the man behind bars if he played the violin or the viola. The man was confused, but he explained that he did do that as a hobby. That was two coincidences, and the detective's eyes widened in shock. The chances of a punk like that playing an instrument were slim, but the e-boy had guessed it in one glance. The man behind bars angrily accused the detective of investigating him thoroughly and even searching his house. However, the detective was speechless, wondering if Woojin was somehow psychic. He had just been casually interrogating the suspect when the boy had come in that afternoon. The boy had not even once spoken to the suspect, and the detective had been surprised to see the boy come into the room. However, Woojin had only needed one glance to draw his conclusion. The suspect had a light mark on his face that indicated headgear, a turtleneck, or a violin. It was also likely that the suspect wore a motorcycle helmet, with a mask and shaving cream. He also had string marks on his fingers, so he could be a fisherman, electrician, jeweler, guitarist, tailor, or violinist. Pulling all of his deductions together, the most likely answer was surely a violin and a violinist. Thus, the youth had made his conclusion that the mark on his chin was from the violin, and the string marks went well with that theory. The detective returned to where the youth was waiting, but Woojin had already left. His colleague had no idea where he had gone either. However, the detective did find a sticky note on the table, and he went to investigate it. It had, of course, been left by the youth, and it pointed out the second coincidence. This meant that the third coincidence was worth investigating, and he hoped that the detective would consider looking into the high school mukbang girl who was desperately asking for help. It was a bizarre array of events and coincidences, but at this point, the detective could not overlook it. He called to his colleague, telling the man to search for the high school mukbang YouTube channel immediately. Meanwhile, the rest of the neighborhood moved on rather peacefully. A bus drove up to a certain bus stop, and the people waiting there prepared to go in. Woojin was at that bus stop as well, and he got his transit card ready, just like his mother taught him. This was the second time, and the boy paid for his bus ride with his card. Carefully, the boy got into the back seat, and he sat there, looking out at the window. He could still remember the toasting of glass. The boy had sat eating meat while his father and another man made a toast. The man smiled and noted that Woojin wanted to be a simple office worker. The boy admitted that he indeed wanted to be a normal office worker, like at the company where he worked. The man laughed because he did not exactly work at an ordinary company. Still, his father's friend had heard that the boy was great at studying and that he solved problems in seconds. That was wonderful to hear. That meant that his office might be the right place for him. The boy was curious and asked if he could take a tour of this normal office building. If his nephew wanted to see it, then he should. So, his uncle invited him to his office. The day he promised to visit was that day, so Woojin noted that he would be at the office in 4 stops. Each one would take about 6 minutes, 10 minutes, 7 minutes, 9 minutes, and it would be a total of 32 minutes to get to where he was going. The office building was located in a giant, tall skyscraper. The boy called out to his uncle that he had arrived. The man on the other side of the phone said that he would be down in a second, and Woojin stared in awe at the giant building ahead of him. He had finally arrived at the Shenhua General Trading Building. It was a true large conglomerate, with many normal office workers going in and out. The boy stared in awe at all the people who walked past him, and he saw all the normalcy around him. It was his dream to live normally, just like these people. Then, his uncle called to him, greeting him as he finally found his nephew. He called the boy to come inside, as he should wait in the lobby instead of outside the building. The main character was grateful for being allowed to visit, but his uncle said it was nothing and was happy to give him a tour. So, they both headed inside. The lobby within was as large as one would expect for a company located in that giant building. It was rather fascinating, and the boy was impressed by the construction. There was a cafeteria in the basement, and this was the SH Shenhua's headquarters. They would also have branches across the country. Gwangju, Pyeongtaek, Daejeon, and Busan all had branches there. His uncle was impressed that he had looked that up already, and the boy admitted that he had. To live a normal life, he realized that he needed to know a lot. That was why he thought that being normal was harder than it seemed. The man laughed and acknowledged that the boy was really smart, saying that they should head up the stairs. The boy watched his uncle check into the building with his card, and they headed inside using the elevators. As they were heading up, the department head's son was suddenly spotted. The two turned and noticed a beautiful young lady. However, the man corrected that Woojin was not his son but his nephew. The man just needed to deliver something. The lady smiled with amusement, and Woojin stared at her, probably noticing a bunch of things right away. They were both surprised to see a high school student in the office building. The lady was surprised and asked what the boy was saying. Obviously, from the uniform, she was a high school student. The elevator was here now, and they could not spend any more time chatting about stuff. So, the man shoved his nephew inside and said goodbye to the girl. He waved and told her to enjoy her lunch as the elevator doors began to close, and he sighed in relief when they could not see her again. They headed to the 7th floor, and the man happily ushered his nephew inside. The boy stared in surprise and shock, amazed as he looked at the normal office that he dreamed of living in. There were people speaking all sorts of languages up there, and it was so interesting. People all over the office were engaged in completing all sorts of different tasks. There were some people sending emails, and others were canceling orders. His uncle called out, asking Woojin how it felt to be in an office building and if he felt like a real office worker sitting among them. The boy admitted that he did not. However, he would work really hard to become a good office worker. Then, the manager got word that the Saudi contract was cancelled, and the man was horrified, saying that he had asked for a meeting to be scheduled first. He called for everyone to immediately come to the conference room. The uncle had wanted to eat with his nephew at the cafeteria, but something urgent just came up. The boy said that it was all right and he had seen a lot after all. For now, he would go down by himself. So, the boy headed to the first floor, and he stepped out of the elevator, unfortunately running into that girl again. She noticed him first, and then she grinned and greeted him. He was silent as he watched her. It was currently 11 in the morning, and a high schooler should not be here at that time. She also did not seem the type who was intimidated by adults. She was a high school student with a calm tone and relaxed expression. She walked in long strides and asked if he had received what the department head had sent him. She walked confidently, blocked his way, controlled the space like it was her domain, and based on her actions, she was likely related to a high-ranking company executive. If she were related to a high-ranking executive, it would not hurt to know who. So, Woojin said that he understood and then said goodbye. With that, he walked away from her without looking back, shocking the arrogant and pompous princess. She yelled and said that he should be in class right now, demanding to know if he was skipping. Honestly, he could ask her the same question, but he did not go to school in the first place. With that, he was leaving once again, and he turned around to walk away. Of course, she did not like being interrupted, but he did not like wasting time. He saw no benefit in talking to her, so he wanted her to kindly stop bothering him. The girl was shocked, but he knew that when a person dismissed people like that, they would feel the need to prove their worth. Now, he wanted to know who she had connections with. Thus, the girl declared that she was the CEO's daughter. Woojin had now successfully tricked the young lady into revealing who she was by pretending that he felt like he was wasting time with her. Also, saying that he thought that he had nothing to gain. Naturally, this motivated the pompous peacock girl to then reveal her true nature as the CEO's daughter. Now that was an impressive figure, and it was just as the youth had expected. At times like this, it was always best to open his eyes slightly wider and part his lips just enough to look rather surprised by this. The girl was now thrilled, believing that she had caught him off guard, and she smirked haughtily, asking him if she looked different now. The girl stalked around him, taking note of his shoes and his clothes. She seemed to be doing some kind of assessment, not that the main character appreciated it. After revealing her identity, the girl was now shamelessly inspecting him as if he were someone beneath her. She had quickly regained control of her emotions and once again asked about school. Since he did not go, she beamed and told him that she was bored, wanting him to hang out with her. Her dilated pupils shifted slightly upward to the right, and the corners of her eyes drooped slightly as well. Her lips curled up like a sneer. This was the picture of greed. Having identified her position, the girl now saw the main character as no more than a toy for her to play with. However, what she did not know was that he was playing her like a fiddle. He could use that greed of hers to control her like a marionette. She hadn't eaten yet, so she asked if he'd go with her to get something to eat. It was framed like it was a choice, but Woojin knew better. He accepted anyway, easily marking the girl as a possible narcissist. He did not really want to deal with her, but she was not entirely impossible. Of course, the CEO's daughter took the lead right away and chose where they would eat. She didn't even give basic location details before leading the way. The world evolved around her. The restaurant of choice was rather large and already populated with a few people here and there. The girl then turned her attention back to the main character, asking if he was studying to be an idol since he wasn't going to school. However, the boy denied that. So, she asked what he did then. The boy explained that he studied and he was preparing for the GD, likely a special exam. Then he asked about her and asked why she was not at school. The girl flipped her hair, mumbling about how she got leave because of that day. Her pupils shifted left, which meant that she could be lying about that. She brushed her hair back, an unconscious reaction to stress. People experienced unconscious stress when they lied, so that was a possibility. Naturally, Woojin was curious about what she meant by that day. Suddenly, it clicked, and he realized it was the monthly shedding of the uterine lining in response to hormonal changes. Indeed, the poor, horrified girl was on her period, and the waiter came over to ask what they would like to order. The CEO's daughter was thrown off by his very casual response. Her face turned red before she ordered 2 course meals. Once again, she had not even slightly considered that he might want to choose his own meal. She had a strong desire to dominate others. The CEO's daughter only just remembered to ask his name, and he admitted that he was Woojin Shin. She then proceeded to analyze his name, saying that it was not bad. At any rate, she was Lee Hiram. Hiram took up her phone, and they sat there in silence for a bit. As time passed, the silence started getting rather awkward for her, and she stared, wondering why her entertainment for the day said very little. The boy admitted that he just did not talk much. The waiter came over with the soup just as Hiram waved her hand and knocked into the poor server. It nearly spilt the soup over, and the rich girl let out a screech like she was the victim. The waiter hastily apologized, she did not mean to startle them, and the rich girl huffed in annoyance. Hiram said it was fine, letting the waiter apologize on and on. Woojin watched the sullen waiter walking away and noticed that she was a rather sensitive lady. Besides, nothing much actually happened, so Hiram had not needed to make such a huge fuss about it. Naturally, Hiram huffed and said that day just made her a little testy. She was bringing that day up again. And Woojin found himself wondering once again if the girl was just lying. Her rubber band fell when she tried to fix her hair, and the girl sulked internally that this was just not her lucky day. She reached out to get it and was surprised when he put his hand by the edge of the table so that she would not hit her head. Of course, the rich girl was somehow oblivious to this and could not understand what he was doing. That was cool, though since he explained it to her, she eyed him suspiciously, and he stared back blankly. She must have had a rough day after all, and the girl protested, saying that he was acting like he knew everything. Well, he did not know everything, but Woojin was rather good at reading people. Her face looked a little tired. Hiram huffed, telling the boy to worry about himself instead. His face was so pale that he was practically see-through. Then, she told him to try out the soup before it got cold. He was pale because he'd been imprisoned for 12 years, but he did not feel the need to mention that. Instead, he took a sip of the soup and was immediately hit with wonder. Something that would always wow the young genius was definitely the rich joys of food. No matter how many times he ate, trying new food would never get old. The CEO's daughter beamed with pride, asking if the soup tasted good and if the soup was definitely on par with the top Busan K restaurant. The lady was much like a fish taking the bait. He got her in his trap effortlessly. If he backtracked from there, repeating the other person's words would help to build rapport. So, he asked about the K restaurant and who she had gone with. The lady beamed that she had gone with an old friend called Kim Yena. Naturally, he had never heard of her. The girl protested that the actress Im Yena was very popular, and the main character went with his approach of repeating her words, just saying that he had never heard of her. This annoyed the CEO's daughter, who then asked if he even watched movies or YouTube. This was regression therapy, reviving past memories through questions to evoke happy emotions. So, he said that it must have been nice to see the ocean. The girl beamed and she added that she'd also loved the fireworks bursting over Guegandagio Bridge. It had been like a painting of pure art. Her body and brain, reminiscing about the past, were then flooded with dopamine and norepinephrine. In that moment, it felt like she was in a movie. The human brain could not distinguish between reality and imagination, like how just thinking of a lemon would make a person's mouth water. That was the state that the CEO's daughter was currently in. She was lost in that wonderful moment when she had seen the fireworks. Though she was sitting with him, she spoke as if she was watching fireworks on a yacht. Just by leading her memories and listening, he could become a source of her joy. In this state, he could even ask her about the heart-shaped fireworks, and she would laugh gleefully about it. He listened intently, and she insisted that it had been hilarious. He pushed the memory further, though, guessing that it was literally a heart-shaped firework. Their main dish was prepared and ready. What a sorry plate of food it was, but the main character made a show of enjoying this high-quality food so much. Then, she asked if he had traveled anywhere, and he admitted that he'd never engaged in travel. The last course was mango sorbet, and she insisted that he should definitely go. Last year, they went to an island called the Hullbox. The boy continued to mention random words to trigger more nostalgia from her, like Mexico, the state of Quintana Roo on the Yucatan Peninsula. She smiled and praised the beaches of that state, and said that the night sky was packed with stars. It was almost like an aurora. She also recalled the beautiful shimmering waves. Suddenly, her eyes widened when she noticed the boy stand to his feet, saying that he needed to study. The girl was surprised that he needed to go all of a sudden when they were just having fun. Then she asked if he was doing some kind of shady stuff. Obviously, he would not admit even if he was doing shady stuff. At any rate, he had to study for the GD, so he bid her farewell and went on his way, much to her chagrin. She told him to wait, and he did wait, much to her surprise. Hiram could not believe that he wanted to leave like that, and she even asked him for his number. He had not even been to Holbox Island like she had, and it would be helpful to have her knowledge when he eventually traveled. She knew all about hotels and stuff, and she even knew all the best restaurants. The lady was addicted to the hormones that brought her joy, and she related those hormones to her experience with him. Thus, she was desperate not to lose him. The girl might have attachment issues and lack strong family bonds. If he used this properly, then everything she knew could easily become his. He stretched out his phone to her, having manipulated her into asking for his number instead of the other way around. Hiram was surprised that he did not even have a phone password. That was dangerous after all. He thanked her for the meal, and then he headed out. Hiram watched him leave in awe, nervously playing around with her hair. She then followed him outside, thinking that they should at least walk together since they had come together. She asked him where he lived, and the boy did not respond. Instead, Woojin was focused on a tussle that seemed to be happening some distance away. It looked like two grown men fighting, and the CEO's daughter asked what he was doing. Immediately, the boy shielded her gaze, telling her not to look. This was a rather serious situation, and someone had just gotten stabbed in an alley. The girl panicked, of course, horrified to hear that there was someone armed with a knife nearby. Someone willing to commit crimes with that dangerous tool. The villain with a knife took off on a run once he realized that he had been spotted, and the boy stared at him, taking in details of everything that he knew about the attacker. Then, the boy raced ahead, heading straight for the abandoned victim. Living a normal life was all that Woojin wanted. He pressed his hand hard down on the wound, administering quick first aid to stop the loss of blood. He told the victim to hold on a little longer while he called the authorities. Someone had been stabbed. He asked for the police to come in, too, and sent the location of the restaurant. The man's pulse was rapidly increasing, which meant that the cerebellum was working to increase the heart rate due to blood loss. The boy asked what the man's blood type was. The internal bleeding was rather severe. The victim managed to mumble that he had a type B, and the boy narrated that over the phone. A stab wound to the abdomen. There was severe hemiperitoneum, which meant internal abdominal bleeding, and the man needed an urgent transfusion. The people on the phone asked for a repeat, and the main character paused. Using layman's terms, he explained that the victim had lost a lot of blood and they needed a transfusion while being transported. His blood type was B and he had been stabbed in the abdomen. They needed immediate aid. They tried to tell him first aid, but he was already doing it, and he needed help to get there quickly. The people on the phone assured him that they were preparing the blood. Once again, Woojin thought about his desire to live a normal life as the man's blood pooled around his fingers. The CEO's daughter had come forward, even though he had told her to stay away. She stared in horror at the victim in front of her, her hands trembling as she stared at the very gruesome scene. The boy did not have the time to comfort her as he was trying to save the man's life. He could not help but think that living a normal life was indeed very hard. Fortunately, it did not take too long for the police to get there, and siren wails could be heard all through the neighborhood. The ambulance was there, and the police were there. It was fair to assume that the victim was being taken care of, so our dude carefully wiped down his blood-stained hands. Then an officer came over to ask him a few questions. Woojin already had all of the answers ready. He fired off that the suspect had short hair and was wearing a gray cap. The man was wearing a black-collared t-shirt, he had jeans on, and weighed about 80 kilograms. He was about 180 centimeters tall, and he was about to drop some info on the man's shoes when the police officer told him to slow down. The officer turned on his voice recording and asked the boy to just cover that description from the top. So, the boy did as needed, and the CEO's daughter watched from a distance, clearly rattled by all that she had seen so far. This must be her first time experiencing something like this. Naturally, most people did not get involved in violent crimes, but our dude had been raised in hell, so he was kind of used to it. The girl had been rather frightened just seeing the man with a knife, and it seemed that the nightmare was going to haunt her for a while. For him, her state of mind right now was also a perfect environment for him to continue his game of manipulation. Woojin strutted up to her like a mother heading to a baby that was taking her first steps. When faced with a shocking situation, it was normal for a person to either stumble or fall because they were unsure of what to do. Usually, a baby who fell was nursed by nurses and other caretakers to encourage them to try again. Like a parent, he could immediately comfort Lee Hiram and restore her confidence in herself. Right now, at this moment, there was no one else to take his place. He noticed that the lady was rather shocked, but it was okay now. This moment would leave a strong impression on her, which would further make her think of him. Gently, he placed his hand on her shoulder, soothing her and telling her that the victim was fine and did not seem to be seriously injured. It was like a mother comforting their baby. The culprit did not even see their faces, so they would likely be caught, and there were a lot of CCTV cameras around. The girl was reassured by these words. Later, in the evening, inside a nice and big house, and deeper inside that led to a nice and big room, someone was taking a shower. It was Hiram, of course, and she washed away the weight of the day's stress under the warmth of the shower. The rich girl could still vividly remember how Woojin had rushed in and taken charge when that man got hurt. He had protected her and then reassured her that after that, everything was going to be okay. The lady smiled under the shower, her mind filled with memories of that boy, just as he had wanted. Later, she turned off the shower and stepped out, toweling her hair dry as she got ready for bed. Her slippers stepped on the luxurious rugs in her room, and she sat before her vanity table to prepare her face and hair for bed. The lady then glanced at her phone and recalled that she had, in fact, never gotten a chance to ask. Meanwhile, back at Woojin's side of the neighborhood, the window of his bedroom showed that the lights were off. The main character was in bed and watching his favorite YouTube video as always. He was still rather invested in that strange kidnapped girl. She insisted that the food that she made was seriously delicious, saying it enough times that it was almost concerning. Woojin admired the food in the video, promising to himself that he would definitely try out that food someday. Then, he got a message from Hiram asking if he had gotten home safely. The boy stared at the phone for a moment and then typed out his response. He sent his response to her, saying that he was totally fine. She was surprised that he was replying in such a short way. Then he cut the conversation short, saying that he was going to get some sleep, and he wished her good night. Then, the foodie turned his attention to more of the delicious food on YouTube, choosing to completely ignore the rich girl. The girl had, of course, left another message, complaining that she was barely done eating yet, and it was just 10 in the evening. To her, that seemed too early for a young boy to sleep. He ignored her and turned his attention back to the wonderful videos that he was watching. The next day, the sun lit up the blue sky with brilliant fluffy clouds, and the happy Shin family was having breakfast as usual. The boy always loved his mother's cooking, and his mother was absolutely thrilled that her baby ate a lot. It was another normal day in their household, and the boy took up his study books so that he would keep reading. The boy got busy, writing and solving all sorts of questions as fast as he could. He had to keep his phone nearby as this was a golden rule to follow in everyday life. Sure enough, it didn't take long for him to get a message, and it was from Hiram. She wanted to say hello. Ignoring messages was also a part of his daily life, and Woojin firmly turned his attention back to his schoolwork. One had to wonder why he even made her like him if he did not like her that much. He noticed some movement outside of his bedroom window, and it was a bird just singing on a wire. A normal, peaceful and ordinary day, just the kind of thing that he liked. Since living a normal life was difficult, he had to work very hard at it. The boy got a phone call, so he had to stop his studying for a moment to pick up the phone. To his surprise, he got a message from manager Kimmy, Young from XX Capital. The man was calling regarding business or money fund loans. The boy paused when he got this call. He stood in excitement, thinking that he might have just won something, but it was very clear as a scam call. Woojin was so smart, but sometimes he was oblivious to this kind of thing. Fortunately, he had a general idea that this was a phishing scam. He kept a serious face while the man on the line told him that he had about 100 billion. The boy gasped in awe, and then he hung up because that was the proper way to handle scams like that. He got a call immediately after, and he was about to pretend it was a system error when he realized it was a call from the police. The boy immediately got serious as they asked if he was Shin Woojin, and he confirmed that he was. The caller asked if he was okay, and he assured them that he was fine. Then he was called to come into the station for a brief statement as a witness. So, the boy closed his door and prepared to leave his house. He was the only one left at home anyway, so leaving the house was rather easy. Woojin slipped out, closed the door, and opened it again for another peek because he was a little suspicious. He stared at the hallway in the normal house of his normal home, mumbling that he would be back. Then, he closed the door. This time would not be like the last time when he got abducted and tortured by horrible people. This time, for sure, he would be back. He would return every day to his happy and shining household without being late for dinner. With a very reassuring thought, Woojin left his home and made his way to the station as required. The sky looked dark and cloudy over the police station, different from the usual bright and sunny days. The hallways also looked rather dark due to the intensity of the situation. As mentioned before, it was because of the hat that he had snatched it, and he just went with his gut feeling. So, the police kept adjusting the image that they had drawn out, asking if it now looked more like the suspect that he had seen. The boy noticed that they had arrested someone who seemed to be the suspect. They asked the boy if he wanted to hear the man's voice, so they let the audio from the interrogation room seep in. The man was protesting and insisting that he was innocent, of course. It occurred to Woojin that it seemed the police just went about randomly grabbing people if they thought they fit a suspect description. The poor man insisted that he was not the one who committed the crime, but Woojin could see past lies and false denials. He focused his gaze on the man before him, registering the man's face in his eyes and making necessary comparisons to the man that he had seen before. The suspect insisted that he had never met the victim before, so he had no reason to hurt a random office worker. As the man spoke, Woojin studied every part of him closely, from his facial measurements to his nervous habits. He could tell that the man seemed to be lying, and the man was very obviously a terrible liar too. That was kind of embarrassing for him. The boy paused in his analysis and the police waited for his verdict. They wanted to know what he thought after hearing the man deny being involved in the attack. Well, Woojin stood silent for a moment, and then he said that the man was definitely lying. That's it for this episode. Until next time.